Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra.
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people
Associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked,
and sometimes what didn't,
you will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts
And inspire you to do even greater things. In this very interesting conversation, Fred George, who's a consulting developer at Scienta AS, and he's a master change agent. And you will hear number of stories, starting from being a developer in IBM to taking very complex engagements in consulting, and how he continuously keeps skilling himself. And he also shares about his wonderful story around being a developer in almost 70 plus languages. Can you imagine 70 languages he talks about, and why he continues to stay that way? Listen on.
Hi, Fred. Welcome to the Software People Stories.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining the podcast. I am sure you have given multitude of podcasts, and this podcast is focused on your career journey and in software, and what were the learnings that you had. And I know you as a prolific speaker. So without much further ado, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Well, Fred George, quite old at this point. I wrote my first code in 1968. My first programming job was 1969. So I've been doing this quite a long time. And I'm still doing it because it's still kind of fun. But any more detail, it's hard to go through over 55 years of detail very shortly. So we'll sort of skip over all the intermediate stuff. But I started out my career in software after university at IBM. So I spent 18 years in IBM. And that was a case where I got a chance to experience a lot of different types of technologies, a lot of very bright people, a lot of very good mentors. And so I think to a large degree, my great mentorships were in those IBM years. People sort of taking me under their wing and telling me to sort of behave better. In my early years in IBM, I was known as the angry young man because I was always sort of challenging the thinking of the older people. That was just the nature of things. It looked like it was wrong, I'd say it was wrong. So I'm still that aggressive. I'm just a little more subtle now about it. But I still try to make my opinions known. And after IBM, I basically went independent. And so did that for quite a few years. Had a couple of years with ThoughtWorks, which brought me to India, among other things. But always more in a consulting role ever since I left IBM.
Excellent, Fred. I have a bunch of questions that I have laid out for you. And maybe I will start with the first one of, being an IBMer. And even today, if you think about it, IBM is one of the biggest software provider. And they provide right from cloud consulting to large, in a moment you say consulting, the first software consulting, the first company comes in is IBM, in spite of so many years. What is your perspective as to how they are able to, invigorate themselves? I have read the book Elephants Can Dance from IBM. What is the secret sauce?
Well, I think to some degree, actually, when I would join IBM, software was not important. It was something that was just, we had to put in there to make sure we sold the hardware. And in fact, the government had sort of gotten upset with us about that. Actually, third parties got upset, saying, you need to separate the software from the hardware. You need to sell them separately. And that was kind of the beginning of treating IBM treating software as an asset. Again, second-class asset, because hardware is much more important. Up to the point where I was working on a project one time with 1,000 programmers, which took 3 years to develop it. And we made $1 billion on that software. It was kind of eye-opening for IBM that said, oh my goodness, we can make a lot of money off software. So I think when the hardware has sort of become more commoditized, especially when the PC business took off and then the microcomputers and mini computers and all these things come out, IBM began to shift from basically a hardware company into more of a software and services business. And so that shift happened pretty much after I left. Software was making money for it, but we're still a hardware company when I left. So I think we started down that path. And I think once they realized that it's much more of a software and services sort of business, they did the things that most businesses do in that case. They acquire various companies. They obviously, have a relationship with Red Hat, purchased Red Hat. They purchased Rational, which was the guys that came up with the UML diagrams and all that stuff. They purchased that company. They began to make, collect some assets. It is very rare, and I think remember the Sun founder basically talking about this, that a company going from a hardware to a services business is very, very difficult. It's hard to move off that, off the hardware business. But he said IBM actually did a pretty good job of doing that, and I think you're reflecting that they're still in that game. The other thing you got to realize about IBM is they probably only have a couple of dozen customers in the world. Their big customers are the ones that generate almost all their revenue. So they're not after you and me trying to get us into various tools. They're very much after the governments, the big banks, the large retailers. That's sort of their market. That's where they make their serious amount of money. But again, they're not interested in us as individuals. Nevertheless, my lessons I learned in IBM, were very valuable. I got a lot of exposure to executives. I presented to the president of IBM a couple of times, for example. Presented to the president of Microsoft a couple of times.
Wow.
Yeah, so, great exposure to the fact that executives are different animals than programmers. That the things you talk about in programmers are not the same things the executives talk about. But don't make a mistake. The executives are very, very smart people. You cannot talk down to them. They have their ideas. But you have to learn how to, meet them more than halfway. So I get those early lessons in IBM, and they've served me very well. I also would say IBM also sent me off to business school at their expense. So I got a degree in business from the Sloan School. So I was basically trained. I was a programmer who was trained to be a general manager, and IBM invested in me to do that. And I think that's the nice thing you would say about IBM is they were willing to invest in their people. They sent me off to school. There was no promises I'd ever come back. There was no promises I ever work for them again. They still covered all the tuition and all the living expenses and paid my salary for that entire period.
Wow. And that is, to some extent, that is a bygone era of loyalty, right, Fred? To some extent, loyalty was a given. If you think about it, my father worked for a single bank without naming the bank for 34 years. That was his second job. And in India, particularly when you have a government job, you pretty much, live till retirement. I think that loyalty part of it, I can't imagine the same company, IBM, doing that in today's era.
I think IBM is still doing that because IBM looks at some of this stuff and says, well, I need to grow some executives. So maybe not the rank and file programmers as much, but certainly the executive ranks, they are constantly investing in their executives. And that means making sure there's young executives coming up through the ranks all the time. Even if most of them at some point would leave the company, they're okay with that. The ones that stay around are quite valuable to them. But I think when you're that large and you think about it from that scope, you sort of invest in people, just a general thing. If you're a smaller company, you say, well, if I send this person off to school, will this person ever come back? And what do I have to make them sign a contract, make sure they come back? Because I don't want to take a chance on one person. If you're a company that's 300,000 people or more like IBM, you're going to make that bet regardless. Yes, some people are not coming back, but that's okay. Others are coming back. So I think, again, as a large company, they can sort of make the bet on the overall trends without having to bet necessarily on the individual. And a smaller company would have to worry about it.
Yeah, I think you kind of talked about building your own path, right? From being a programmer to management degree and knowing how to deal with executives. Any stories that you want to share, Fred? I mean, many of us, right, when we climb up the chain or ranks, we all start as programmers, and sometimes it is often said that if you don't understand the programmer, you kind of get a brash attitude in some places, which is not necessarily the most humblest of the lot, right? So what are the few stories or takeaways that you would like to share with the listeners? So what do you tell yourself? How do you prepare
Well,
that
I
mental
think
shift?
yeah. So I think executives really only react to problems. So unless you're able to articulate a very concrete problem, it's not going to get executive attention. You can't walk in with a theoretical problem saying this is going to happen if we do this, keep doing this. You almost have to wait till that bad things start happening to sort of raise that point. The other thing is thinking always in money. I worked with a McKinsey executive, senior McKinsey executive, one of my startups, and he said, well, everything's about the money. And I said, well, what about this? He said, oh, I can translate that to money. What about you can translate this to money? So from an executive's perspective, you think about what's the financial argument about what you're doing? What's the financial benefit of what you're doing? Is it given the capability for you to be faster going to the marketplace? Because that means money. Does it mean I can catch up with the number one company by doing something radical? That's again money. That's market share. You got to be able to talk in those terms. Code and how much harder it is to write the code, need to rewrite the code. That sort of goes over their head. That's not important to them. You got to translate that to money. As soon as I say I have to rewrite something, all they're saying is it's going to cost me money. That's a negative thing. Oh, I can get a better time to market. Okay, that's a positive thing. So you got to put it in terms of benefits to the business itself. Again, the more you can tie it to money, the better off you're going to be in that argument. If something's going wrong, you almost got to make sure it goes wrong and point it out and tell it why it went wrong and how you might fix it. Most of the time when I'm working with executives, I'm about, and again, I tend to go with clients that are looking to make changes. If a company says, we're happy with where we are in the marketplace, we're happy with how things are working, I don't take them as a client. I walk away. It's just my impact, I can't have an impact. They don't want to change. I'm looking for the company that says, oh, we want to be better in the industry. We want to catch up to the number one guy. Or, oh my goodness, we're losing market share to somebody else. And how do we stop this hemorrhaging stuff? That opens it up for the dialogue that I can have with them. And then I talk about how do you create innovation? You create innovation by killing the fear. How do you kill the fear? Well, you look at all the little sources of fear. Estimates are one source of fear. Deadlines, another source of fear. And you sort of point these out to the executives. They understand, and they'll understand this. Oh yeah, I'm creating this artificial fear. And why are we doing that? Well, somebody down, between me and the executives has sort of been asking those questions because they're afraid of something. I think the other thing you got to realize is the middle managers, the people between you and the executives, in general, are going to be risk averse. They don't want any change in the system. They're not interested in the change. The only exception to that may be somebody who wants to be the CTO himself or wants to become that CEO. So you find a mid-range executive who's trying to get up to the top ranks, he's going to take chances. But most of his colleagues are not going to take chances. So these are not guys you're going to be able to convince to do anything different.
Very interesting where you put it, saying identify your change agent and go along with them. Because in the end of the day, if you understand acutely the problem that, and particularly contextually, right? I think that makes all the difference. And when you speak about change agent, when you work as a consultant and you've been in a consultant for about 20 years now,
I
is
would
that
say
right?
since 1991. So I think we're getting closer to 35 years.
Okay. So about 35 years as a consultant. So my first question or as a consultant for you is, what made you propel as a consultant? I mean, it must have been hard, right? Being an employee, being in your, zone of having had such great, experience in a large company. What made you shift to becoming a consultant?
Well, to some degree, it was a relatively safe move for me. My spouse was actually also worked for IBM. And so when I walked away from IBM, she still had a job. She still had income. She still had benefits. And so I had a safety net when I was making my first forays out there. And basically, almost took a year to sort of just retrain myself as a programmer. Just write code, try new languages out, try some new things out. So it took me almost a year, and then I started, finding various engagements. And so somebody said, "Well, we want to move Windows NT to an HP machine. Let's see if we can do that." And I'm going around talking about Windows, the new Windows operating system, so 32-bit Windows operating system. So that hooks up, and we wind up, having an engagement. Engagement goes very well, and I sort of wind up in several engagements like that always come out very positive, and then that sort of builds yourself a level of confidence. And then I began to realize that things I can do some things that are very hard for other people to do, and the trick becomes finding an engagement. In my case, which is also hard. If someone wants to hire me to develop some web pages, I walk away because I'm not going to be better than many other people in doing web pages. If somebody has something they don't know how to do, well, that's enticing. And one of the things I believe, and this is a matter of self-confidence, is that I think I may not be able to do everything, but I can probably do most things at least as well as anybody else, which gives me a set of confidence going in there that says, if it can be done, I can probably get it done. Now, part of my management training and part of my executive background helps me put a team together that helps me do that. So one of my colleagues in Norway calls it socio-technical. It says it's sociology and technology sort of coming together, building the right sort of social team to actually execute the technology plan you have in mind. And so I spent a lot of my time tuning my teams. So one of my first engagements when I was in ThoughtWorks, my first engagements at Nationwide Insurance, they published this, so I can talk about it. I made 10 staff changes in my team in the first 6 weeks. Kicked some people out, brought some different people in. I made that many changes tuning my team, which is purely management/sociology stuff, and nothing to do with the technology choices. And I continued to tune my team throughout that entire project. So one of the things I try to encourage, certainly my team leads to do, is you're not stuck with the people you're given for a project. You're not stuck with these guys. If it's not a right fit, make a change. Yes, people are going to complain about changing, and somebody's going to try to make you not do that. You can always win that argument. And so one of the things I will always do is retune my team as I start. And I've almost every project I've had, I've kicked client programmers out of the room. There'll be somebody from the client side, and they're the client, right? And you think, well, as a consultant, I can't tell the client what to do. Yes, you can. That's why you're there. You're there to tell them what to do. And sometimes you have somebody who doesn't want to work with us, work with the team, doesn't want to conform to the other norms of the team, doesn't want to try some of these new stuff. Then go back to your other job. I mean, you had a role before I showed up. Go back and do that. But you don't need to be here. You leave. And again, I see a lot of people saying, well, you can't change the team. This is the team I was given. No, you can change your team. Try.
That takes a lot of courage and to a large extent being an outside in look. Because sometimes when you're an employee for long, you get painted in the same shade, so to speak. And having an outside in view and having that courage, right? Fred, I think that you have you can always come out and you have your strengths to bank on.
Well, I think, some things work in your favor. First of all, being an outsider does help. And I would say almost every client I've gone into, there's somebody inside the client that's been saying the same things I've been saying. They just are not being listened to. But sort of my access to the executives and my way of sort of talking to the executives is something they didn't have and weren't able to pull off themselves. It also helps to sort of have the gray hair, because that sort of says, wow, you've been doing this, so therefore you must know how to do this. Well, frankly, I don't know how to write functional programming any better than almost there are way more better functional programmers out there than I am. It's not one of my areas of expertise. There are way better database programmers out there. I'm not very good at database programming. So there are really good people in these areas that are way better than I am. What they don't have is the ability to tell the executive what's going on in executive terms, to sort of understand what the executives care about and making that bridge, or realizing that that middle manager, he needs some indication that progress is being made. I mean, he's responsible for it. I mean, people are looking at him to make sure the object's done, and he looks at the team and says, "Well, give me some feedback. Tell me how it's going." Well, it's going fine. Well, that's not good enough. Give me some more. I can't trust that. And so one of the things I focus on is what metrics I can push up to the executive all the way through the management chain to show progress. Because if I can't push a metric back up, then they're going to turn around and put one on me. And what they like to put on you is deadlines. So it needs this much functionality, and here's the date I got to have it on. And it's like, and you're going to commit to that, right? And you say, well, I'm not sure. Well, it's a commitment. And of course, that creates fear. And of course, it's not my schedule and things could happen. But if you're pushing metrics the other way, then you're showing, here's my progress. Here's how fast I'm working. So they're seeing you're making progress all the time. And teams are reluctant to report to management about what's going on. And therefore, management, puts things on you. If you really want them to stay out of your hair, you need to be talking to them. Make sure they understand exactly what's going on with you so they go worry about this other team who doesn't want to talk to them. Because as a manager, you always go to the area that's unknown. So if you're giving them information, they'll go look somewhere else because these guys aren't talking to me. So I'm worried about these guys finishing their work.
Yeah. That's the paradox of being agile, so to speak, right? Many people say, okay, if I become too transparent, there'll be more micromanagement. Actually, it's not the case. If you become more transparent, it's easier to ask for help. It's a lot more easier to get autonomy. I mean, when I say transparency, showing your progress, showing the problems, and showing your, successes, right, Fred?
Yeah, and there's almost got to realize the job of management is to work for the team. So it's called management inversion. There's lots of other terms for it. Good managers do practice management inversion, which means they're there to help you. So if you're having trouble getting resource, these are the guys that can fix it. If you are having trouble with some team member, these are the guys that can help you fix that. And there's a reluctance to use them as a resource. But your manager is just as much a resource as your keyboard or your mouse or your compiler. They're perfectly good resources. And they're very easy to some level to manipulate. You go into the manager, you say, oh, poor manager, I'm having this trouble. I don't know how to get it fixed. And you give them the little puppy dog eyes and they just want to help you. And so you can give them assignments. It works very well. And so let them go fight some battles for you. Don't be afraid to have that discussion.
Absolutely. I mean, you when you started about how you started consulting, you touched upon a very critical subject, right? In terms of skilling yourself when you started something, and then sort of when you start skilling, you also think that you can do. I'm writing your thoughts in terms of most things you do as good as anybody else. I mean, how do you derive that strength? I mean, any stories there you want to share, Fred?
Well, I think to some degree we can talk about what I look for when I recruit. Because one of the things about our field is it's constantly changing. So when I'm recruiting programmers for my team, I'm looking for two different traits. I'm looking for people that are willing to learn, and that can be shown up by, let's look at their GitHub account, see what they're playing with. Do they go to basically open source projects? Do they go to meetups or whatever? Show me that you're actually trying to, basically learn more. And I'm also looking for that they can have great conceptual skills. In other words, I can think about a problem in an abstract fashion. If you have those two skills, I can teach you all the rest. You will be successful in the systems I put together. So that's what I'm looking for with that. And it doesn't, if somebody comes in and says, by the way, I'm a Java programmer, I'm very suspicious. If you put any adjective in front of the word programmer, that means you're constraining yourself to just that one language. And of course, when things happen and things change in your career, then all of a sudden you're not valuable to me anymore. I want you to come in and be a programmer. It means if you're going to learn a new language, that's fine. Don't worry about it. It's just another language. In my career, I've counted up at least 75 languages I've used.
Holy cow.
Yeah. The CS, and today CSS is HTML. There's some obviously a lot of CSS sort of tools you can use CSS around. Now you're into Kotlin, C#. I just wrote some frameworks. I wrote some frameworks in Python and some in JavaScript and TypeScript. If you just say I'm a Java programmer, then basically you're not going to be successful in my world. You got to think I'm a programmer. I'm going to keep learning.
I mean, that is the key, right? in terms of, don't put yourself in a box. Often programmers say, hey, it's somebody else doing it. I think that sort of reflects victimhood. More and more you become your victim, you show yourself as a victim, others will also treat you that way. You say, no, this is my world is expansive and this is my playing field. And that sort of reflects the kind of work that you attract as well.
Well, but also you see job titles getting in the way. So a little of this is also the company's fault. Because they're going to bring you in, they're going to call you a junior Java programmer. And then you're going to be a junior staff Java programmer. And then you're going to be a Java tech lead. And so they're these sort of roles when in fact they shouldn't be doing that. So I did a startup in California. We had only one title for our developer. It was developer. There was no adjectives in front of it. They weren't called senior or staff, or there was just one title called developer. And by the way, the business side was only one title for them, business guy. That was it. Because we didn't want to get caught up into the title game. Because we were programmers. So it turned out we wound up using Clojure. We kind of using a little bit of Node.js. But that's not where we started out. We just started with a bunch of programmers because they were just developers. That's what they were. So I think to some degree, there's systems in place to sort of basically have institutionalized waterfall by our computer titles. Our titles for our programmers basically reflect waterfall. You're going to be QA, you're a front end guy, you're a back end guy, you're a Java programmer. All these titles sort of put you into pigeonholes for waterfall, and yet stifle your career growth. In order to break through that, you have to leave the company and go work somewhere else. I mean, that's a horrible thing to make you do just to get better skills. Yet that's what companies are forcing you to do.
True. In fact, the recent one, I actually saw the title called Terraform DevOps Engineer as a title. Like, how can DevOps is basically a tool chain. You got to know at least a bunch of them to actually be able to do it. Like, how can people have so specific titles? And then you say, okay, then the skills are not available in the market. I often find it very funny. When company executives come and talk to me about it, I'm like, okay, what are you looking for? They also get into the saying that, okay, we got a recommendation to do this and this tool. This is what we are looking for, different engineers to do this. And then when they don't work with each other, you have a different set of a problem. So I say we are inventing our own problems rather than solving for it and looking at the big picture, right?
Yeah, and I think again, sometimes the job description is, well, human resources turns around and says, well, what do you need? Well, I need a programmer that does this because that's what we're going to be doing next week. So this is what you're going to ask for. Well, in fact, if you're going to hire somebody permanently, you want to make sure they're a programmer, right? You don't want to make it so narrow that basically you either can't find them, or if you do find them, they're never going to grow into anything else. Now, there's always a role for the sort of the Uber expert, whether he's an Uber database expert or a front-end engineer, or whether he's using the latest tools. There's always a role for that sort of expert. But the majority of the developers should be more generalist. They should be able to adapt to whatever needs to be done today. And those are the guys that make great, guys and gals that make great long-term programmers for your organization.
Talking about choosing your own team and being able to be fearless about it, right? And continue to select based on a couple of criteria that we have laid out. I have done this many times when I coach the teams. When a team member is not a right fit for the team, you just remove one person and change the different persona of a person. I've seen dramatic difference in how the team behaves with each other and how they work. I think that is a skill sometimes I feel our middle management are not very well taught. They think that the hero of the team, if they are removed out of it, they feel that they are inflicting an handicap on themselves. I mean, I wonder how we can inculcate that sort of a thinking saying that it should be sum of all the people, and sometimes as a team, it's much more than one person's output.
Well, again, if you're doing this from the middle manager perspective, you're probably too far removed from the actual workings of the team to make that decision. So what you really want to do is push that decision back into the team. We want the team to decide who should join, but also you respect the team when they decide to kick somebody off the team. We used to call it vote somebody off the island to go off one of the TV shows, reality shows. But yeah, if the team says this person is not fitting, then basically the job of the middle manager is to take that person off the team and then go figure out what the problem is.
Yep.
But certainly then making the decision about what the right team chemistry is without being part of that team is a problem. There's also some social science in here. If you have a team together for at least 6 months without a change, that team is stagnating at that point. There are no new ideas flowing with that team. They've already had all the conversations about what tools they want to use and what techniques they want to use, what the architecture is. Those discussions have been had and been resolved. And they've stopped thinking. So if you're not stirring that pot, regularly, every 3 months or so, sort of stirring that pot in some degree to sort of bring in some new flavors, you don't have the innovation. The innovation will stop flowing. And software is all about innovation. If every piece of software to some degree is innovative. In other words, if it already existed, we would just buy it or use the library. So every time somebody's writing some new code, it's because we're solving some small problem that's never been solved before this way. And that's innovation. It's called innovation. It can't be scheduled because how do you schedule innovation? How do you say, well, yeah, we're going to invent something new today. You got 3 hours to make it happen. It doesn't work. So you want to sort of create the environment for that innovation and then you make sure it happens. So, but you also got to be aware of the stagnation of innovation that will occur where the team has been kept together. And from a middle management perspective, well, I got these guys in there, I put the team together, they've been working together for 6 months. I'm not going to touch the team because I still need them to work. I've trained them. Don't touch my team. Well, in fact, you should touch your team because they're stopped innovating. They're not going to come with any new ideas. They're going to be stuck back in the past. And you're losing that opportunity to sort of, get them excited about what they're doing again. Even just bringing in a fresher, just asking the stupid questions a fresher might ask will actually cause them to rethink some things.
I actually call this as a beginner's mindset. Typically, when you have a fresh pair of eyes, often, people ask why innocuously. I think that's a power by in itself. I think that by in itself gives that. But I've never thought of it as 6 months. Somehow, when I consult, I normally use a 8-month period, but maybe 6 months is a good period. Have you used this 6-month period often, Fred?
I do stir my teams aggressively. So when I was working in Bangalore, and I had 4 teams, I think in Bangalore, 1 team in Minnesota, back in the States. I would move 1 person from each of the teams every 4 weeks and move them to a different team. And yeah, every time I try to do that, they would sort of yell and scream about, oh my goodness, you're breaking up the family. We're going to decommit our schedules. And then about a week later say, oh my goodness, this new guy you gave me is amazing. He's brought some new ideas to the team. And you say, okay, fine. You understand now. And then I change again a month later and oh my goodness, you break up the team. I hear the same whining all the time. It was one of those things I actually forced on the team, even though, I hate forcing things like that, but that's one of the things I forced because I knew I needed to keep stirring the teams up, even though they'd always scream and yell about this. It's one of the few things I kind of would push. And that, again, I know about the 6 months. I've been trained, and that's part of the things we picked up in business school. We studied innovation in business school and how to create innovative environments. And that was one of the things we pointed out very quickly. So I'm always stirring the pot. Now, most new projects, it's not a problem because new projects are you get bringing people in all the time. New things are starting up. It's always that way.
And I think stirring the pot, I love it. I have never used the term. I used to call it as, rotation and some very basic term. I like the stirring the pot term.
Well, yeah, it's kind of like that pot that's set there with the same over 6 months. It's kind of got scum on top of it. It's stagnant and nothing magic is happening there. And it's time to stir something else in there, create a different flavor, see what happens. Usually only good things. We had a case when I was working in London at a different startup, where we had a bunch of programmers who were working in Google advertising. And the manager actually hired a PhD from Cambridge in statistics and dropped her into the team. It was a woman, she had to be pregnant as well, dropped her into the team. And all of a sudden, the team is starting to worry about big data, doing analysis and stuff like that, because we stirred something in there. There's no way the programmers would have ever hired a PhD from Cambridge in statistics. That would not be their next hire. They'd hire some programmer that looks like themselves. So this is a fact where managers sort of took the innovative approach, saying, I know what I need to stir the pot. When I was working at the Daily Mail, I brought in closure programmers. I mean, we were a Java shop. I brought in functional programmers. I brought in Ruby programmers. I brought in Node.js programmers just to stir the pot. And so we wound up using basic Clojure and Node.js in the long run. Those were a key to our successful use of tools. But part of it was also just stir the pot. Make people start thinking again. And by the way, they had titles like Java developer and Java lead, these Java titles, which of course were irrelevant when we're using Clojure and Node.js.
Very, very well put. I think what you're saying is, you cross-pollinate ideas. What happens is you take the strength out of different techniques as well as technologies, right? I think makes perfect sense. Just one.
We talk about diversity, and sometimes diversity is sort of interpreted as gender diversity or orientation, sexual orientation diversity, or sometimes cultural diversity of types. I'm looking for thinking diversity. That also means a functional programmer doesn't think about a problem the same way an object programmer does. And they think different than the QA does, versus a front-end developer that's seeing customers and users and stuff like that. So this is diversity as well. If you put these people in the same room with these sort of diverse backgrounds, you create a little bit of conflict there. I mean, again, in the innovation training, we learned that innovation occurs in zones of discomfort. So by sitting there, by having a front-end guy working with a back-end guy as a pair and trying to get something done, they're not terribly comfortable with each other about that. They understand where the other people's coming from. But that creates the innovation. They come up with different ideas, with the genesis of these ideas. If you study, what people get Nobel Prizes for, Nobel Prizes are awarded for things they do in their 20s. And this is the point in time where they've been through the university, they've gone through PhD studies, they've studied all these different fields, and they put these different fields together in some new way and built on top of it by merging these ideas together. It's a genesis of all these ideas and coming up with the next innovation. And then they just stay on that innovation the rest of their career. They never innovate again. They just stay in that little niche they started in. But the Nobel Prize they get when they're 60 is actually what they did in their 20s, when the innovation was occurring. So taking that to heart, you're always trying to create this sort of a bit of discomfort, the genesis of different ideas coming together. Certainly gender diversity and sexual orientation diversity always helps, but also in cultural diversity. Our London startup, we had 35 people when I joined the London startup. We came from 15 different countries.
So in the first part, we heard Fred talk about his various experiences. And we are stopping at a point where he talks about thinking diversity. And he's going to also share some of his stories on building thinking diversity. Now, we have the second episode that is dropping on next Tuesday. Please listen in and give us feedback. Thank you.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.